Very happy Wellbeing Wednesday. Dr. DP here. It's incredible to think that it's already been, 5 or 6 years since COVID completely changed our lives. But I think there still remains a question that we may not be asking often enough. And that is, did everybody actually recover? And what I mean by that is, some people went back to work. Some people resumed taking care of their families. Some people went back to everyday life, but their bodies may not have actually fully returned to pre-COVID baseline. In other words, the concept of long COVID is really real. And a person may be experiencing symptoms currently and not necessarily connect them with an infection that could have happened years ago. Some people experience fatigue that just persists on and on and on. There may be shortness of breath. There may be a lack of endurance. There could be musculoskeletal symptoms such as weakness or tremors or pain, or you could have dizziness and difficulty sleeping even. Some folks have complained of neuropathy, where there's hypersensitivity or pain in the legs. And particularly they find themselves having to rub their legs and so on all the time. Sometimes the senses are altered, like your vision and your hearing. Maybe a person might have significant exhaustion or mental malaise after, even the slightest exertional activities. So something that we really need to consider is that some of these people, although they're having these symptoms, are still having to push through, because their lives frankly didn't stop just because COVID stopped or because COVID ended. They still have to work, they still have to pay bills, and they still have to, they still have people depending on them. And so those people may have just kind of learned to compensate. They may have just decided to themselves, well, this is just my new normal. And so they don't walk as far, they avoid the stairs, maybe they have to sit down more often, and, they just feel wiped out after any type of activity that might involve exertion. They just can't do much of anything for the rest of the day or even the next day. And so it may be time, if this is you or someone that it may be time to kind of connect the dots and not necessarily look at these things in isolation, but say, hey, what happened to me? What could have really gone on in my body that makes it not have returned to its pre-COVID state? And so as a doctor of physical therapy, that's when I kind of enter the conversation. I look at function, your strength, your endurance, your balance, your activity tolerance, how your body responds to demands. And I help to identify the changes, and also when further evaluations may be necessary. So, long COVID is not something that a person should really try and diagnose themselves. Lingering symptoms may not necessarily be COVID. It may not necessarily be long COVID, I should say, but it's not something that a person should really try to manage or diagnose themselves. Persistent changes could signal that your body deserves or needs further attention. So we have to think to ourselves, COVID ended, but did my body fully recover? So it may be time to think, hey, just pushing through is not going to be enough. It might be time to actually investigate. Friends, I hope you have a wonderful Wellbeing Wednesday, and let's remain on this path to suffer less as we live longer. Have a wonderful day.